There's the pass to Leitner. Puts it up. Yes!
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cameron Chronicles. I'm your host, Ranjan Jindal, here once again with my co-host, Caleb Dudley. Caleb, how are you this evening?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. We have a really special episode today. We're actually going to combine two mini episodes into one. We're going to cover both Duke men's and Duke women's basketball. Both teams are really gearing up for some great postseason runs. Obviously, the men's team has one more week in the regular season, but for the men's discussion, we'll have a very special guest on that many of you Cameron Chronicle listeners might recognize, so definitely stay tuned for that. It's going to be a great time. So for this first part, we're going to talk a little bit about the women's team with our women's beat, Martin Heintzelman. Martin, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to have you on this time.
Great to be here.
Yeah, of course. So right now, the Duke women's team just concluded the regular season just actually a couple hours ago with a loss over in Chapel Hill to North Carolina, 63-59. The Blue Devils fell to 19-10 on the season and are now locked into the 7th seed of the ACC Women's Basketball Tournament, which will be this upcoming week. So super excited to talk with you guys about it. I think this is the perfect crew. We've kind of all covered this team pretty closely over the past couple years and know a lot about this squad. But just we'll start with some overall thoughts and then talk about the game specifically and then preview the postseason. So Martin, I'll start with you just to start off. What have been some of your takeaways from this team this year? What stood out to you about this group? And
I think the biggest thing that we've seen throughout the season, because I've watched a lot of the games, I've covered a lot of the games. I think there's just a tremendous amount of growth with this group, and I think we sort of knew that we were going to get that a little bit coming into the year. You have like 3 or 4 freshmen coming in, including Luann Battinson. Like you have a lot of young blood. You don't really have that many returners, especially very few upperclassmen returners, and so expectations were relatively low. And I think this team ended up exceeding them. I think the growth from especially the freshman class, but all over the place, has just been incredible. We've seen some sophomores really stepping up, and then the freshmen have really come into their own as the season has gone on and come through in a big way down the stretch for this group.
Yeah, definitely. Caleb, what about you?
Yeah, I think, Mike Martin said the expectations definitely weren't super high. Pretty max exodus in the offseason was especially Celeste Taylor going to Ohio State. But I think the upperclassmen that Duke does have been really impactful this season. Ricky Richardson's the leading scorer on the team. She wasn't great against UNC, which we'll talk about in a little while. But she's been great all year. She's the best scorer by, I think, like 1.5 points maybe. Kennedy Brown has been the anchor down low for one of the best defenses in the conference for 2 years in a row. And then Camilla Emmisbo has been a great add out of the portal. I think she leads the conference in blocks. I don't know if she does anymore, but she definitely did like a week ago. So those three have been a good core. Obviously, you're missing Vanessa De Jesus for the year, who would be another veteran. But I think overall you have a good core, and with those three, and then obviously good things to build on with the freshmen and sophomores.
Yeah, definitely agree with all those points. I think for me, you mentioned how good the defense was last year, and this year it's been just as good. And Kennedy's been great down low, but also the guards have played great defense. Alicia Kana was another freshman that has just been a burst of energy for this team and a perfect Kara Lawson player, if you will. But I think this year the offense has been a lot better than last year because if you remember last year, the defense was so well, but the team would only go as far as the offense would take it. And unfortunately, just the shooting wasn't there. And I think this year the team is shooting the ball a lot better. I think turnovers are still the main Achilles heel of this group, and it will be down the stretch. But if this team gets shots up, down every time the floor, if you can end the possession with a shot, this team has shot the ball pretty well, 45% from the field and 32% from three. You have shooters, you can spread the floor, and I think this team just plays hard. That's one thing that Kara Lawson teams do. Every single possession, no matter if the offense is good or bad, this team is going to play hard. Every possession will fight for points and on the glass especially. So that's really carried them far this season. And right now, sitting in 7th in one of the best conferences, the best conference in college basketball this year. So it'll be interesting to see how the team competes down the stretch, but definitely competitive against some of the best teams in the country like we've seen earlier this year. Now moving on to the North Carolina game recap. I mentioned it earlier, so Duke fell 63-59 to split the season series with the Tar Heels. Had a great overtime victory against North Carolina earlier this season, but couldn't quite get it done down the stretch. Caleb, you were there in Chapel Hill. Well, both of you guys were there in Chapel Hill. Caleb, you were covering Martin in the stands. But Caleb, I'll start with you for this one. What were some of your main takeaways for the game, and why do you think Duke fell on the short side this one?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to we talked about this off the podcast, but Duke women's basketball and UNC women's basketball this year are about as even as you can match up. The first time obviously went to overtime and Duke pulled it out at home, and it was kind of the same story in Chapel Hill, just the other side. Um, I wrote this in our beats picks for the game. I just didn't think there was any way Deja Kelly and Melissa Utsby would lose on senior night. And they were both spectacular for the Tar Heels. Kelly with 18, Utsby with 17. And I thought just for Duke, they started out slow and kind of got out of rhythm. And it seemed to not affect everyone as much, but Richardson especially really seemed kind of off kilter all game. She was 1 for 9 to finish the game. Didn't score until the fourth quarter. So I just thought, UNC did a good job of speeding up Duke early on. They know they're a young team and kind of forcing them into some unforced turnovers. But I thought Duke, at the end of the game, still had a chance. And Coach Lawson said this after the game when I asked her. They just had some missed assignments down the stretch, but they had a chance where they had a steal and then a free throw chance to tie the game on a layup to go to overtime, and just didn't fall for them. So I thought, not anything super disappointing for the team, but definitely not the outcome they wanted.
Yeah, all these games, I mean, even dating back to last year, the 5 total games that they've played have all come really down to the wire. So, yeah, good points there. Martin, what about you?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is still that this team's offensive sets aren't spectacular. They're not generating a ton of really incredible shots, and so I think just when the shots aren't falling at a above average clip, this team really struggles. They're not getting a ton of super easy looks against UNC. That's especially challenging because they do have some really strong defensive players with people like Utsby out there, but 35% from the field today certainly isn't ideal. And I think just they struggled against the zone a little bit. They struggled early. We saw them regress to the mean in the second and third quarters, and then struggled again on the stretch. Ultimately, this team is going to live and die by its shooting ability because it does everything else really well. And I think today the shots weren't falling, and getting outshot from the field by almost 15 percentage points and still holding it close down the stretch like that is really a testament to the way this team has just sort of played this gritty basketball all year and will continue to do so into the postseason against some teams that are really good.
Yeah, I think going to Martin's point about the shooting, the thing that stood out to me, I didn't even forget to mention this, is the layups. Duke, especially in the first half, just continued to squander fast break opportunities and easy layups. I remember there was one in particular where Jaden Donovan just threw it away on the fast break, trying to go to Ashton Jackson, and against a close game with a rival like that, you just can't do that. They were 8 for 21 on layups today, so that's obviously not going to cut it. But they haven't been that bad at it all year. But just something to look out for going forward.
No, and I think that nothing was more emblematic than at the end of the first half, second quarter. Apologies. Jaden Donovan steals the ball. Duke is up by 1 heading into the half. Jaden Donovan steals the ball with 8-ish seconds on the clock. Is heading down the floor, wide open. Very very easy layup, and just goes up for the dunk. And it did not work out, which it's tough to see that. And I guess I see what she was trying to do, trying to swing some momentum, sort of punctuate the half. But definitely not a veteran move. Something that when you're could potentially decide the game down the stretch. So not really something that I imagine Duke wants to see more of heading into the postseason. But yeah,
Yeah, for sure. Kara Lawson has mentioned she calls them gimmies. She'll say we missed some easy ones. That's been kind of a pattern through the season. But yeah, those were important down the stretch here. In any case, Duke is 7th in the ACC, and now there's one game currently happening as we record the podcast. But when this will be released, the ACC tournament bracket will be officially set, and Duke is going to be a 7th seed in an ACC tournament. And I mean, this league is just teams are all beating up on each other because there's just so many good teams, and it could really go any way. And so this tournament's going to be fun. I think Duke has the potential to go all the way and has beaten all of the top teams in the ACC pretty much, but also can fall prey to losing, in the first round to a team that gets hot. And so this tournament will be interesting. I'm curious, what are your guys' thoughts on kind of how Duke fits into this tournament? What do you guys see as kind of a ceiling floor for this team? Martin, I'll start with you.
Oh, that's tough because I do think that this is an incredibly up and down team, and you
Mhm.
really have no idea what you're going to see on every given night. I think the ceiling is probably a semifinals appearance. I think they can make the semifinals because they just have to beat one really good team in that situation. And I think that we've seen that Duke can give anyone a game this year. I think a lot of that is due to their defense. They make really good teams look a lot worse. And so I think that that's where their strength is. They play well against good teams they have all year. They took Stanford to overtime very early in the season. They played South Carolina even through three quarters. You know, they've beaten Virginia Tech. This is a strong team. But they're just up and down. And so it's really going to depend on how they can adapt to, a new environment, a lot of games in a few days. Against some teams. Great example, Virginia Tech, two seniors who play 40 minutes a game. They've seen the postseason. They know what it's like. Duke does not have a lot of those players on its roster, and I think that's going to make it really challenging. So I'd say ceiling is probably a semifinals appearance, and maybe if they get really lucky, they can make a run into the finals. But the reality is, it's just going to be challenging for this team, I imagine, to really get their act together and win two games against what will presumably be really good teams like Louisville or Notre Dame or Virginia Tech, something like that. And so I think that's about where they're at.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I tend to agree. You mentioned the youth on this team. There are 8 underclassmen out of 11 rostered players, which is really a testament to this coaching ability, and this growth has been spectacular. I'll hold my thoughts for a second, but I'll let Caleb go first.
Yeah, I think I'll take it one step farther than Martin. I hesitantly say I think they can make the finals. Um, right now, when you look at the bracket, obviously it's not totally finished, but from what I gather, I think Duke's side is Syracuse, NC State, and then Florida State, and then some of the teams at the bottom. So I think honestly that lines up pretty well for Duke. Duke has beaten Syracuse handily at Syracuse. Duke has beaten NC State at home.
All in the past week and a half.
Duke has murdered Florida State at home. So I think the first round looks like it's probably gonna be Virginia, or I think the 14 seed is Wake Forest. But so I think for Duke, if they can get past State in the quarterfinals, I don't see them like getting blown out by Syracuse unless Deja Fair goes clear, which she can. But I think Duke matches up really well with those two teams compared to a Notre Dame or a Louisville, who both gave them a lot of problems in the regular season. So I think for Duke, they could easily get to the finals if they just play their game and do what they did the first time against both those teams, or the second time against State, I guess. But in the finals, I don't see them winning the finals against Virginia Tech or Notre Dame or Louisville. But so I think they definitely have a chance to make a good run and improve their seeding come the real tournament, the big one.
Yeah. I'll tell you this. I don't want any part of Notre Dame if I'm Duke right now, because that team is playing extremely well. Probably better than anyone in the league. I mean, they beat Virginia Tech and Louisville this week and beat Duke just last week, and that team is really clicking. If you're right, if they're on the same side of the bracket as Virginia Tech, I think that bodes well for the Blue Devils in this tournament. But for me, it's going to come down to turnovers. Like, that's the thing that I think will define the ACC tournament for Duke, just because if Duke can, I mentioned this earlier, just get shots when it's on the offensive end. Even if you're missing shots, if you're taking shots, that's better than live ball turnovers, than letting the other team, win the fast break margin. Because Duke is going to generate a bunch of turnovers and a bunch of fast break opportunities because they're so good at, jumping in passing lanes and rebounding the ball. But if you just limit that on the offensive end, I think this team can be really, really good. Like we saw that in the first couple of quarters against NC State, and then just locking up Deja Fair, who's one of the best players, not only the conference but the country. This team can go far, so it'll be interesting to see how they respond and how they do that. The games back to back is going to be interesting on the conditioning of this team, because they love to press, they love to go up and down the floor. So that'll be fun. But ACC tournament is this week in Greensboro, so if you're nearby in the area, definitely check out the Blue Devils and the rest of the tournament, because these teams are good in the ACC, so it should be fun. Martin, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we can check in maybe after the ACC tournament and preview March Madness. But great analysis today. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. We're back for the second half of the podcast, and we're going to discuss the men's team with a very special guest. We have Max Rego here, who is the former host of the Cameron Chronicles. Max, welcome back, man.
What's up, boys? How we doing? Good to be back. How's everybody doing?
We're doing great, man. Just following in your footsteps here. What have you been up to since you graduated?
Yeah. So, as Ranjan said, have not been hosting this podcast for the last however many months it's been, 10 months, whatever it's been. So graduated in May. Moved to DC. Was doing some sports writing for the Messenger. If you follow journalism at all, you know that company went under in end of January. So kind of looking for sports writing now. But still following as much Duke as I can. So that's kind of the update there.
Awesome. And Max is here and we'll be covering the NC State game tomorrow, correct? With the Devil's Den?
With
No.
with Devil's Illustrated.
Devil's Illustrated, yeah.
Our boy Connor O'Neill. So should be fun. I'm in town for the weekend and staying for a couple extra days.
Awesome. And we also have Jonathan Levitan, who has been on the complete grind the past few games. He's covered the last 3 Duke basketball games.
Yep, 3.
3.
Good to be here.
Awesome.
Man in the arena.
Yeah, so the last time we chatted was before the Miami road game. So since then, just a quick recap. Duke went on the road and beat Miami pretty handily, 84-55, and then traveled and concluded the road trip at Wake Forest, falling 83-79 there. And then since then, Duke's had a 2-game homestand, defeating Louisville and Virginia, both pretty handily, and that moved Duke up to 23-6 and 14-4 in the ACC. Currently, Duke is second in the league with a week left. This is the last week of the regular season for the Blue Devils with a trip to NC State Monday, which is going to be a big one, and then finishing it up against North Carolina at home to end the regular season. So we'll preview those 2 games and kind of recap the past couple of weeks of Blue Devil basketball. So to start with that, we'll start with the takeaways from the road trip and Miami and Wake Forest. We can kind of combine those. Jonathan, I know you were there at the Wake Forest game. Could you just talk a little bit about some of your takeaways from that game?
Sure. Well, I'll start by saying that I think it was a phenomenal basketball game. I think that gets a little lost in the afterward. I don't really know what else to call it. Yeah, the aftermath. Thank you.
Postmortem.
I don't know about that one, but the shot making was just incredibly high level. I think it was something like 14 lead changes, 14 ties. There was like a 10-minute stretch in the second half where neither team had more than 1 possession lead. I think it is going to go a long way for Duke and Wake Forest if they can do what they need to do this last week of the regular season to get into the tournament, to have played that kind of game come March. Shire said something post-game about how shocked he was that Wake Forest was on the bubble, and that if Duke had managed to bang in a 3 at the end of the game, Wake Forest would have just suddenly been one of the first 4 out or out of it entirely.
Yeah.
I think the flip side of that is that this is the only game that Duke has lost in the last month, and they were within a bucket of winning it, and there were times where they had it out there to win. Shire talked a lot about that post-game too, about how they really had the opportunities to put that game away, specifically at the start of the second half, and weren't able to take advantage. But there is a world where one more bucket, and we're talking about essentially a perfect month for Duke. And I think that now, especially after this past week, that's where we're standing, where Wake Forest is really the only blip on the resume recently. Duke is in a really good spot, and I think that a great basketball game isn't too much of a downside for this past month.
Yeah, I mean, I think Shire said it post game, how. Like you said, Levitan, how can Wake just be that teetering on the? I know they lost to Notre Dame and Virginia Tech, but gosh, that's a really good basketball team. Hunter Salas, I think one of you guys said it. Is he as good as RJ Davis, just on a worse team? Yeah, I think you said it, Levitan. The shot making, the way they move the ball, they play a really unique style of offense where they move it really well. They play small. They can get you inside out. That's a team that if they do what they need to do to get into the tournament from, the last week of the regular season and then up in DC for the ACC tournament, that's a team that's a 10 seed that can do some damage. I would not want to be the 7 seed or maybe the 2 seed that plays them. No, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's the type of game that can only help Duke. And the result, it is what it is. But I think you have to realize that you can't. No Duke team is going to goes perfect in the last 2 months of the season. I think Shire even said after that game, his senior year they lost to Maryland, And the locker room is kind of similar in like they're so determined to kind of like bounce back, get off the mat, and kind of get going after that. Like with the amount of tough games that they play, like they're not going to go perfect, and like that's the type of game that you're gonna have to play, and wherever they play the regional, and like it's good for Duke that they got that kind of under their sleeve.
Yeah, I mean, Wake still has not lost at home, which is interesting. I think the biggest thing that Wake was able to do is create matchup problems inside for Duke. When you had both Andrew Carr and Efton Reed in the paint, Mark Mitchell struggled to guard Carr, and what happened is when people were trying to double team the post, then you let shooters open. There was one play where Salas was wide open in the corner, and you're like, well, how did he get that open? Well, it was just a double team there, and Wake Forest has the ability to do that and create a lot of matchup problems offensively. But I thought Duke did a really good job, especially on offense, moving the ball, and the guards, all four of them, played really well and shot the ball well. I didn't mention this earlier, but Caleb Foster did get hurt in the second half of that game and has not played since. And Shire said after the Virginia game that it will probably be some time until he's back. So we're still waiting on Caleb. Hopefully, definitely wish all the best for Foster. He played great in that Wake Forest game in the time that he was in, but the guards really moved the ball well, and I think Duke's offense really showed why it's been one of the best in the country so far. So that was kind of my takeaways from that game.
Yeah, kind of building off everything everyone said is, I don't know if I said this to you, Ranjan, maybe I did during the game. I thought that it was encouraging that it was maybe the first game, or especially since UNC, that Duke lost not because they didn't play hard enough, because they just didn't execute down the stretch.
Yeah.
Which I think is honestly more encouraging, especially because like we might tend to forget because we're used to it, like covering Duke, that Duke's still a young team. Like they have guys that have not played a lot of college basketball compared to other teams, especially Wake. And so I think they had those turnovers down the stretch where it was just not good basketball. I think Proctor thought they had a timeout. Last possession, and then ended up turning it over. But for Duke, I thought Jonathan said it was a great game. They played perfectly hard enough to win the game and played well enough to win the game. So I just think for them to be able just to have a nice experience where they had a game where they were close against a good team and just didn't execute down the stretch and know what they have to work on to get better. I think it can only help them down the stretch.
Yeah, for sure. So after that game, Duke came back to Cameron Indoor for a 2-game homestand. Started out with Louisville, defeated the Cardinals again, like I said, 84-59 on a pretty solid performance. Started off a little bit shaky there, but Duke really got it going there late in the first half and early in the second to put the Cardinals away. Jonathan, I guess I'll start with you again because you were there. But what were some of your takeaways from that game?
Sure. Well, I think we can agree that Duke looked pretty good on Wednesday against Louisville, but I'm a little, or at least I was before yesterday's game. I was hesitant to take too much away from a good game against a bad team. Yeah. Louisville is not a good college basketball team. They are, I think, 1-10 or 1-11 away from home now. But it was big for Duke because it was their first game without Foster. They needed to see, they really needed to show what they could do without a key piece of their rotation, of their top 6-7 guys. If you're going to include Ryan Young in that key rotation, he is a guy who had started the last 3 games. And I think we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but we saw a lot more Sean Stewart. We saw a lot more TJ Power. Tyrese Proctor got back in the starting lineup for the first time since before his concussion, and he didn't light it up. He was really good on Saturday against Virginia, but he didn't really need to light it up against Louisville. The really encouraging part for me was Mark Mitchell.
Yeah,
I think that in general, a few low-scoring games here and there, his level of play has been really amazing to see in the last month and a half, 2 months. Something like 1 of 22 from 3 to start the year, and I think 8 of 14 since. He has really been a knockdown shooter in addition to being aggressive on offense. There was one crazy play on Wednesday, I think, where he drove the lane with some fire. He missed the dunk, but it was not something that I'm used to seeing from Mark, and I think that this team, especially down one of its key players, really needs in the front court when Kyle Filipowski has had to carry so much of the load up there on offense.
Yeah, I mean, like I think Flip missed the dunk too, so maybe that's something they gotta work on. He missed it against UVA.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard to take away from Louisville because like, gosh, how far has that program really fallen? I mean, like when I was a freshman,
Yeah.
they were the number 1 team in the country for a bit, and Chris Mack really had it rolling. Yeah, there was a game in Cameron. The first kind of big ACC game when I was at Duke was Duke, I think, top 3 Duke against top 10 Louisville, top 15 Louisville. Louisville won the game.
Yeah.
David Johnson had like 25 points, if I remember correctly. And like just to see how far they've fallen. I mean, I know it's I know we're a Duke podcast, but like, Jesus, like as someone who's followed college basketball for a long time, like that's like shocking to me. Is like how far they've kind of fallen off the map, and like so it's hard to like take away stuff against from Louisville, but like the one thing for me is at least like Jeremy Roach had a really solid night. As for a guy who against Wake, I guess the one thing I didn't say for the Wake takeaway stuff is like he had some really bad turnovers. Like it was really squirrely at the end of that game. Like some really bad plays. But I believe I'm looking at the stats right now. He had 19 points, 3 threes. Like really only one turnover, 6 rebounds. Like it seems like when he doesn't have the 20-point game every night, but when guys get injured, when he needs to step up, he is capable of doing the things Shire said. Like he's capable of going for 30, but he plays within himself and he plays within the system within with his teammates where he doesn't need to do that every night. He's patient and like he's patient with it, and I think like he picks his spots really well. I think that's something that he's gotten a lot better at. Is he came out of high school. He was a great athlete, and he was a great finisher at the rim. But like he added like stuff to his game where he can like take you off the dribble. He can kind of attack with the mid range stuff at the elbow. And like that was a case in point where he just hit so many. They didn't not necessarily like big shots because Louisville wasn't really ever in the game, but like I think he had a couple threes to get it to 10 for the first time, and like from there, like all right, we're done here. Like this game's over. So I think just like him steadying the ship was kind of like, that's going to be the guy that like kind of has to take the reins, I guess, like at least down the stretch, in those key kind of games for Duke, and like I think you can see like this, the seeds kind of start to be planted for that.
Yeah, he's so efficient and he runs this offense really well. So that was a great game for a number of players, and kind of to see Duke adjust without Foster and see maybe how the games will be without Foster moving forward. Moving on to the Virginia game, it was a complete beatdown and Cameron Indoor once again. The Blue Devils just jumped on top of Virginia from the beginning, ended up winning 73-48. And for me, like the main thing that kind of stood out, one was just Filipowski's intensity. I was interested to see how he would respond, and how he would play against Virginia. He even on both ends of the floor, just he had some great rebounds, and from the start he was aggressive offensively, and he was looking to create mismatches there. He had a 3 on a nice pick and pop, and he was great on getting offensive rebounds and second chance opportunities. But you could see it on his defense. He wanted to play hard, and that's super important for Filipowski because sometimes he can get down on himself when he's not scoring his best. But even if he's not scoring his best, Flip needs to be somebody who can be a defensive stopper inside and be big and use his size to Duke's advantage. And that's been sometimes a little bit of a problem. But he was magnificent against Virginia, in my opinion. And then just generally. I know Virginia's not a great offensive team, but Duke's defense over the past month, kind of since North Carolina, with the exception a little bit of Wake Forest, has been phenomenal. Over the last 5 games, Duke is 100th percentile in defensive rating, according to CBB Analytics. And against Virginia, they run a lot of screens on offense, a lot of motions. You have to communicate, right? Like that's the one thing against Virginia that you have to do defensively. And I think Duke did a great job of it. There's a few like shot clock violations and big blocks. And I think that was really great from Duke. So it was really encouraging. And, moving forward, that'll be important against some of these great offensive teams that Duke will play.
Yeah, kind of building off what you said with Flip, I think we saw that he had that steal off the inbound and then the windmill. We haven't seen that from Kyle Filipowski maybe all year.
That was shocking.
Yeah, and so I think he said after the game, I saw a clip. He said he had been lollygagging a little too much.
He also said he was auditioning for the next White Man Can't Jump movie.
Well, that's less important than basketball, but also fair.
I feel like Dalton Connect has that on a lot.
But so I just thought for him, maybe to have that game where he's maybe now flipped the switch to being
No pun intended.
Yeah, no pun intended. But if he plays that way down the stretch with how Duke's been playing, they're going to be really hard to beat. And so I think kind of going off Ranjan, you said Virginia obviously is known for defense. Duke had 44 points in the paint against Virginia. Yeah. And found ways to score 73 with Jeremy Roach and Jared McCain being 0 for 7 combined from 3. So I'm just really impressed overall with how they put on offense. I thought they would win. I didn't think they would win by that much. against a Virginia team that's very good defensively. And so I thought, very good outcome for Duke there. Maybe the best game of the year for them.
I want to take a second to talk about Proctor in this game too. I know we touched on it, but he's had an up and down season, and that he's been up and down in and out of the lineup and had a few down games. But for the most part, he's been really good when he's in the lineup. There are still NBA teams that view him as the best prospect on a roster full of NBA talent. But we're seeing, like we did last year, where he is coming around in March. Shire talked about it last night after the game, that this is the time of year where Duke not only really needs him, but where he's shown that he can play really good basketball. Last night, to see him hit 3 out of 4 threes in his second game back in the starting lineup when the Foster injury kind of threw things out of whack in the backcourt. I think it's really reassuring for Duke in knowing what they can get from him down the stretch as they go to NC State on Monday.
Yeah, totally. I think him and Roach kind of last year, I think they had the really good dynamic. They were able to play off each other really well, and it's different this year with McCain kind of in the fold, and Flip and Mitchell are still able to handle it when they get aboard. It's kind of what's unique about this team. But yeah, I mean Proctor he has such a unique kind of game. I mean he has. Him and Roach have a lot of mid-range stuff, and that's kind of unique for a couple guards. Proctor can kind of make you pay off the dribble, and he's a hard guard. I think even for guys like Reese Beekman and the guys, I don't know how much I don't have the stats in front of me how much he guarded him, but I'm sure he at least guarded him a little bit. And it's still when he's operating like that, he's a very tough player to cover. I guess the one thing not to pour cold water on the Duke parade a bit from UVA. I thought it was a really impressive performance. I was at the game, and it was really impressive. But I think for me at least, I'm not sure. I know UVA is a good defensive team. Man, is that a bad offensive team?
Yeah.
If they make the tournament, I'm good on watching that, their first round game. I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm not losing any sleep over that. Gosh, it's hard. I know they're a great program, but Reese Beekman, dude, it's hard for that guy to have to deal with such a be the only kind of playmaker on such a bad offense. I mean, Duke made him pay. Duke made him work for it, but it's just they can't hit shots. They missed they missed some bunnies at the rim. They hit shots that I could maybe make.
Yeah.
Come on. Yeah, it's just Virginia's. I think it's a clear top two, and the ACC. The top two is Duke and UNC. I would say UNC deserves to be ahead of them just based on having the head to head. But the gap between 2 and the field, Jesus Christ, it's massive. I would say Clemson honestly is probably the third best team. I mean, we can talk about that. But I know they lost last night. But yeah, it's just Duke. I think the real season, not the real season, but Duke still needs, I think, to get tested, and they'll get that against NC State. I think is even a harder game maybe than at home against UVA, and then at home against UNC is obviously the ultimate regular season test. So I think it is an encouraging performance, but I think it's still press pause about anointing Duke as a surefire Final Four type team based on that game. But
I think that's an important footnote because the last really good offensive team Duke did play was Wake Forest, who is lights out at home, and they kind of had their way.
Yeah, they shot 60% from the field. They didn't miss. It's a long way to go. So, but yeah, I mean, I think UVA is they're a good team. I wouldn't say they're the type of team that Duke probably will need to beat in the tournament. The Duke's gonna need to play against a leg up in competition.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great segue into kind of what we're talking about next, because we're getting into the last week of the regular season before the ACC tournament. We mentioned Duke has NC State and North Carolina. Duke and North Carolina are fighting for the 1 or 2 seed in the ACC tournament. I'll kind of try to recap what I've seen real quickly, but basically there's about a 4-horse race here for the 4th place in the ACC: Syracuse, Clemson, Pitt, and Wake Forest. And from what I mentioned, or from what I remember, if Duke and North Carolina were to end the regular season with the same record, Duke would have the tiebreaker over North Carolina for Syracuse and Clemson if either one of those teams were the fourth place team. But North Carolina will hold a tiebreaker if Pittsburgh or Wake Forest was the fourth place team, and that basically would decide who would be the one seed in the ACC tournament because the standings after they go head to head go down the ACC standings, and so if you're trying to see who to root for, if you're Duke, root for Syracuse and Clemson, which was a little bit complicated because they play each other Tuesday, but that's kind of how the ACC standings could shake out.
Great timing.
Yeah, I know. But right now, yeah, Syracuse is 11-8, and then Clemson, Pitt, and Wake are all 10-8. But I guess we'll just kind of talk a little bit about maybe some teams in the ACC that have either captured your attention for good or bad reason, and maybe teams to look out for moving forward. Caleb, I'll start with you. What are some teams you're looking at?
Yeah, I don't have a ton
Yeah.
to offer outside of what you've just said, but one team that stood out to me that hasn't really been good this year is Notre Dame. They have looked really good the last two games against Wake Forest and Clemson, both wins for Notre Dame. And I think, obviously, they don't have the level of roster that Michael Shrewsbury wants them to have just yet, but Marcus Burton and Braden Shrewsbury are really dang good at basketball.
They're freshmen, too.
And are both going to be really good players in the ACC as long as they stay around, which I know Shrewsbury probably will because his dad's the coach, but Burton we'll see. But I think, for them to have those wins for that young backcourt and that young team just is really good for them to kind of start building momentum towards next year. So for them, they're a team that's really stood out to me in the last couple of weeks.
I'll take the easy one. It was a bad week for Wake Forest. A week ago, we would have been talking about them as pretty much in the tournament with a couple of easy games coming up, but really tough break for them in the ACC to go on the road, I think both times at Notre Dame and then at Virginia Tech. And did not look like a tournament team, and we'll probably pay the price for it.
Yeah, Wake's got interesting schedule moving forward. They stay at home, which is good for Wake with games against Georgia Tech and Clemson. And I think that Clemson game is going to be what decides the fourth place. I think it'll come down to that one, just in my opinion. Maybe give Wake the slight edge there because of how well they've played at home, but they're going to have to play better definitely on the road and a neutral court as the ACC tournament comes up. They'll probably need a game or two there to get in the tournament safely and not be sweating too much. Max, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Levitan, to your point, I think Wake probably still makes it. They have enough, solid wins where I feel like they could. And again, they're good at home, so I think that, this week might be a better week for them. I think, for me at least, the team that's kind of, for how good of a program they've kind of flown under the radar. Syracuse, they haven't won 20 games in the regular season in kind of a sneaky long time.
First year head coach, man.
Yeah, that is replacing Jim Boeheim is you're replacing a Syracuse institution. And he's played a lot less zone, dealing with a lot of new players. That's a different type of program. What?
No, I was just we were just talking about the joke, the John Rothstein red bleeds orange.
Yeah.
Syracuse guy.
Don't even get me started with Rothstein.
Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, for him to be 20-10 in his first year, based on the metrics I'm looking here at KenPom, they are currently 79th in KenPom. It doesn't seem like they're probably going to make the tournament unless they win the ACC. If they get to the finals, I think they probably have a good case.
Yeah.
But man, he deserves maybe some ACC Coach of the Year run. I think him. Honestly, I think him, Forbes, if they can maybe get it done this week, I still think he's done a really good job. And past that, it is tough because the ACC it's been up and down. A lot of teams have kind of been Duke and UNC have kind of been the top two all year, but there have been it's been a rotating cast of characters who are in the 3 to 7 spot all year. And I think Syracuse is kind of getting hot at the right time, and if they catch a good matchup, I think they could make a little run.
Yeah, especially I think what's happening with the ACC is a lot of these younger teams, and Syracuse in particular young, but just generally are kind of figuring it out here in February and March. You see that with Notre Dame. Georgia Tech's obviously had a few really good wins. Pittsburgh's been playing well. Their freshmen have really grown up. I think that's a dangerous team, really dangerous team. I think Pittsburgh's a tournament team. But just some of these teams in the mid-tier of the ACC can really challenge and get some maybe surprise wins in the ACC tournament. So that'll definitely make for an interesting tournament. But we're not quite there yet for Duke. Got 2 games left. We'll talk about those. NC State, I'm going to go tomorrow and cover with our sports editor, Andrew Long. That'll be a fun one. Caleb, I know you've mentioned how Duke has not historically done well in Raleigh there, but what do you think Duke needs to do to to maybe break that streak and win.
Yeah, I think, like you just said, I think State's lost. We looked at it. Duke's lost 4 of the last 6 at PNC Arena. It's been a tough place for them to play. Obviously, last year was abysmal for the Blue Devils, but I think NC State's very inconsistent this year. They were winning against North Carolina yesterday and then went over 15 for a stretch and didn't score for like 10 minutes, and then they lost. And so I think for Duke, just needs to play their game. Don't let a rocky start like it did last year really spiral into a huge blowout. If they do that, I think they can handle business. DJ Horn's the guy they need to stop for NC State. He's been great all year, but I think between Proctor and McCain, they can do a decent enough job. And I think Duke, as long as their PNC struggles don't magically continue, they should be okay tomorrow.
Yeah, NC State's kind of like a running gun team there. They can try to, get you out and shoot the ball and speed you up a little bit. But they're not a great defensive team, so I think Duke can still capitalize there. And DJ Burns is a great offensive player, but defensively, I think if he's guarding either, Filipowski or whoever it seems to be, they can kind of capitalize there. But what about you guys? What are you looking for in that game?
I'll say quickly that I think you just touched on it a little bit, Caleb, but Duke just can't overlook what's a pretty feisty NC State team, might be the right word. I don't think they are. Filipowski and Roach talked last night about how they remember whatever it was, 15-0, 20-0. Yeah. They remember that from last year. They remember going in there and getting the hurt put on them. So I don't expect that they'll be looking ahead to UNC just yet.
Yeah, I think John talked about that, where it's like, he's kind of grown with these guys, Roach, Proctor, Mitchell, Flip, like, since that NC State game, that was kind of the low point, I would say, of last year's Duke team, and like, the turnaround in the 14 months since has been, it's been impressive, and now they have another a chance to kind of show how far they've come, and like, NC State, it's for them at least, like, they're probably not a tournament team. They're 17-12, 9-9 in the ACC. They're not really gonna make it unless again like they make the finals of the ACC tournament, and then maybe probably not even then. Like, DJ Horn, he has the kind of the green light, and like this might be like the last chance for them to kind of get a big time win, and like I like him, but Kevin Keats. We're talking about we're talking about hot seat territory.
I don't know.
He's a good coach, but NC State has for being the third best program in the area, like that's a pretty proud tradition. Like, they have a national title in the last 40 years. I know it was
41.
41. Okay, yeah. Oh, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's 2024. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, they've had good teams in the last 20 years. Like, I feel like the expectations are higher than what they've kind of produced in the last 7 years since he's been there. Like, he's a good coach, but it just seems like something is kind of missing. I don't know, but I think it'll be a tough game. I think getting off to a good start is very key for Duke, especially on the road. Because they got off to a great start against UVA. I mean, that was really impressive. Yeah, and again, like I think just it's the last game before UNC. You want to keep yourself alive in the race for the regular season championship in the ACC. Like, it is still and it's a rivalry game. Like Duke and NC State, it is a rivalry in every sport, and it's just gonna be a tough game. These are the types of games that you have to kind of get done as you prove yourself as kind of a contender.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned Horny shooting like 43% from three, which is crazy
Yeah.
with his volume. But that'll be important. Yeah, you mentioned UNC, and we'll quickly just touch on that. Got the rematch in Cameron. Last time UNC was able to win off a really good offensive output, and I think this year this game, I think Proctor did a pretty good job on RJ Davis for the majority of the game, but UNC was kind of able to take advantage of that by letting other players shine and using screens to get RJ open. And so I think it'll just be important to make sure you box out and don't let UNC get those open threes and get offensive rebounds like they did last game, because that's what they do so well. And Baycott did so well. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. Obviously Harris and Ingram had a great game last time, but if Duke can kind of sharpen up a little bit on the defensive end there with some of your just boxing out and pressuring the ball, I think Duke can bounce back. But what are you guys looking for in the UNC game maybe?
Yeah, I think I know Jonathan touched on this after the game in his sidebar of the first game, but Duke's effort was really just not there to the level of North Carolina the first time they played. And so I think with the way Duke's been playing, you can expect them to match that intensity, if not up it, compared to UNC. And so I think, just diving for loose balls, making boxing out, like Ranjan said, like extra attention to boxing out and closing out hard on shooters and everything like that. And I think for me, I'll plug him just because I love him a lot. I think Duke has a secret weapon that wasn't really that good the first time they played UNC, and that's Sean Stewart. Talk about effort guy, that is Sean Stewart, I would say. He had a really, I thought, solid game against Virginia. He had a nice chase down block. He's really good at rebounding. I think he leads the nation in rebound rate. Might not anymore, but he did before Virginia. And so I think for Duke, obviously without Foster, it's going to be tougher to match offensively. But I think if they just up their level to where it should be, intensity-wise, they should be okay.
We will see Sean Stewart and we will see TJ Power against UNC. They are mainstays of the rotation without Foster. We thought it might be Jalen Blakes, but it's been TJ Power and Sean Stewart. Pretty classic last few years of Duke freshmen entering the rotation late in the season. We saw it with Mark Williams a few years ago. I think that's the biggest example of it.
Yeah.
But those guys have been out there and they know they are playing for minutes, and you can see it. There was a great play last night where Stewart, or maybe Power, dove on the loose ball and got it ahead to Stewart.
Yep.
That was some freshman energy right there. I think that Duke really got destroyed in the loose balls in the first game, so that's a big area.
Yeah, I think Stewart, like that's a good point on Williams. Is like that's kind of the most recent guy that kind of came into the rotation as late in the season, and like that was the first year I covered the team, and like him kind of emerging changed how that team played. He gave them a rim protecting presence, and he gave them an inside presence that their best player was a forward in Matthew Hurt. He wasn't really an inside back to the basket type presence. Williams at least wasn't like he didn't have great post moves, but he gave you like a guy that you can just throw it up to at the rim and he can go get it. With Stewart, like he's not as big as tall as Mitchell, but or tall as Williams, excuse me. But he changes the way that you have to prepare for Duke because he gives you that rim protecting presence, and like he just, even if he doesn't block the shot, he changes the way he alters shots. He has to make you like double clutch and adjust and stuff like that. Like he's the player that like can really can make an impact on he might have 2 points and 3 rebounds, but his impact is a lot more than what you see in the box score.
Yeah, front court depth has kind of been an issue earlier this season, just because you've had great minutes from Stewart and Power and Ryan Young and Spurs, but just haven't put it all together. So that'll be really important. And I think it'll help just Stewart and Power getting those minutes against Virginia and Louisville, and I think moving forward against NC State will, and they'll be more comfortable in the rotation. But yeah, that'll be huge. It'll be a great week of basketball nonetheless in the Tri-City area, so it'll be fun for sure. Max, Jonathan, thank you guys so much for joining us. This was fun.
Yeah, appreciate it, boys.
Feels just like old times.
Yeah,
this is
glory days.
Well, check out our coverage of all this at DukeChronicle.com. We'll have a lot of stuff going for the North Carolina game and for postseason, but we'll check in after that, kind of preview the tournament moving forward. But yeah, this is March. College basketball is at its peak time, so thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time. For Caleb Dudley, I'm Ranjan Jindal. This has been the Cameron Chronicles.
Let's go.